So you mentioned, physical disciplines. I think that the most difficult when you first arrive West Point is mental. We flew in Coeur d'Alene, loops, barrel rolls. When we landed, he said, Roxanne, two things. Number one, you joined the wrong service. You should not have went in the Army. And oh, by the way, number two, my consumer promotions person came to me and said, we've got a problem. We just, on a whim, tried out the number. It sent us to a porn line. Anytime you're successful, you're going to become a target. Yeah. Dave, I'm as human as anybody else, right? Yes. And so, in quiet moments or when I'm by myself, I was crushed.
I refuse to stay in a victim mentality. I gotta stand and fight for my honor and my family. That's how I did it, cause that's how it had to be. So now I'm slaying dragons and I do it happily. I told him I refuse to be another casualty. I looked inside the dragon's eyes and then I told him casually, hi, I'm a dragon slayer and I got a dragon lair. I'ma go and slay a dragon, then I'm gonna drag him there. I don't care, I ain't scared. Look inside my heart and there's a lion there. Conquering my dragons, I ain't fighting fair.
West Point graduate and former Army captain Roxanne Bernstein built a distinguished career at global blue-chip companies such as Kraft, Kellogg's, Post Holdings, and Textron. Now a two-time president and seasoned operator, she is a regular in the boardroom, having guided and influenced at both the executive leadership and board level, advising on growth strategies, M&A activities, and the development of high-performing innovation engines. The cumulative value of her innovation launches exceeds $1 billion in net revenue, her most proud of which was the launch of the most successful new business in Kraft Foods' history, MiO Liquid Water Enhancer. She has turned around struggling businesses and driven growth on such storied brands as Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, Altoids, Kool-Aid, Crystal Light, Honey Bunches of Oats, Mead 5 Star, Pebbles, and Cessna. Roxanne was named to Progressive Grocer's Top Women in Grocery 2019, named to Office Products International's Top 50 Most Influential and Inspiring Women 2023, 2013 Top 10 IRI New Product Pace Setter for MiO.
Well, Roxanne, it is great to be with you today. I know that I mentioned this to you offline, but you're the first person I've ever invited to be a guest on the show based on a comment that was made on a post that I had. And you had a C.S. Lewis quote there on integrity, which is one of my favorites. And that caught my attention. And I saw West Point. I saw that you were president of Fortune 500 company. And I looked a little bit of your resume and I thought, this is definitely a giant. This is a woman who knows how to get things done. And I kind of want to start, if you don't mind, from a little bit of the beginning. Take us into how did you find your way to West Point in the first place, and why, when you were recruited, did you say yes to such a big challenge?
For sure. Thank you for the question, Dave, and thank you for having me on this show and taking the chance based on a C.S. Lewis quote. Hopefully, I don't make you sorry for that. But from my standpoint, I had been a leader most of my young life in terms of a lot of different organizations, whether it was student council, CYO, a number of different elements. It was important to me. I was comfortable in that space. But I got to be honest, Dave, I didn't know about West Point. I wish I could tell you I did, and it was a lifelong dream. Can't tell you that. But I was as happy as I was and well-adjusted. I was not from a family of means, and I was the first in my family to go to college. And I was very good at school. I mentioned I'd been in a lot of different leadership extracurriculars, and I was fortunate to be really good in track and field. And so with that, I was recruited at the Texas State Track and Field Meet by a West Point assistant coach to go run for them. And when I considered all of the options that I had in front of me, none of which necessarily involved my family's ability to pay, West Point was far and away the most difficult choice amongst all of them. And so because of that, I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. I wanted to go do that and to have the ability to lead people for 5 years. Actually, when I went, the commitment was 6 years and they changed it while I was there. But to have the ability to lead people for that amount of time post-graduation was really, really exciting to me. And so I did it. My first time setting foot on an airplane. My community gave me a scholarship for $1,500, which was at the time, it was the only expense that you had to worry about going to West Point, and it was to buy a computer. Couldn't afford it. Thought that was going to keep me from going to West Point, but, it really does take a village. So the community banded together and gave me the means to go. And it changed my life.
Did you know that Leading Giants has over 120 micro-learning modules from 4 to 19 minutes on entrepreneurship, communication, anything to maximize your influence? We are here to help you build the life of your dreams by maximizing your influence, growing a company, leading people at levels you've never led before. If you're in sales, having a greater opportunity for increased closing percentages and larger activity than you've ever had before. It's time now for you to jump in and join Leading Giants. All you have to do is press that button right down there. In order to access this, share with your friends, become a giant. We'll go slay some dragons. That's awesome. Well, you must have been a little bit of a celebrity in town with your athleticism and leadership skills there. Okay, so now you're at West Point, and you have that intense combination of not just the disciplines of West Point itself, academically, physically, everything that is involved, but now you're also competing at the highest level in track. And not only that, in like the crazy events, mid-distance and distance running. I mean, these are, I get tired thinking about those. So how did you deal with that? How did those disciplines all marry themselves together? And, how did it shape you?
Oh, for sure. You mentioned, physical disciplines. I think that the most difficult when you first arrive West Point is mental. Everybody who was there came from a place where they were a local celebrity, right? Whether they wanted to be or not, and they came from places where their hometowns were really proud of them, right? Really proud of them, and they were local celebrities. And then you realize everybody around me is, to use your word, a giant. Like I just went from being, the big man or the big woman on campus to being surrounded by people that I don't even feel, kind of worthy to be here. And at the same time, you're dealing with all the stresses and the assimilation into a new lifestyle, a new culture. And so it was difficult in many ways. Athletics and track and field in particular was a wonderful stress relief, to really just be able to go back to who you are and lose yourself in your own train of thought and really dig into something that you know well and that you're good at. And so for me, that was track, and that was a blessing that helped me ultimately get through 4 years of the academy. But it also meant I had to dedicate myself even more so in many ways than others. So to be a good middle distance or distance runner, and I was incredibly fortunate to be the MVP of the cross country team, to set 7 academy records in track and field, and to be the captain of the women's indoor and outdoor track teams. So it was just amazing for me, a wonderful experience, a great journey, but I had to work my butt off for it. So Reveille, which is what, kind of calls everybody out into formation, where you had to have your uniform ready to go and get inspected before you would leave for breakfast. All march off to breakfast together. That typically happened at about 6:30 in the morning. But I needed to work out twice a day. So myself and my fellow teammates, we would be up 5:30 in the morning on our first run of the day. Pounding out, 3 or 4 miles to really, condition our bodies and get ourselves ready for going to battle on the track over the weekend. So, but again, it was equal parts stress relief and additional push along the way.
And great formation for what you were about to become, which you thought, by the way, was going to be an Olympian. What happened there?
So many kids grow up with a dream, right? You watch the Olympics and think, I want to be there myself. But, when you go to the academy, that's not something that you think is going to happen for you afterward. I had the tremendous honor for 1 year of my active duty time to be a member of the Army's World Class Athlete program. which was a program to bring active duty military members closer to the civilian population at large. It was the way for the Army to say, look, you can be successful in the Army. And so I would fly around the country making presentations to auditoriums full of high school kids to talk to them about the experiences and in the U.S. Army. But then I was also training. It was my job to train with Army across my chest everywhere I would go for a berth on the Olympic team. It was my objective to secure a spot to compete at the U.S. Olympic track and field trials and to be able to make it onto the team. But I missed the trials. I missed the trials by a second in the 800 meter. And it was, crushing to me. It was a time when I was putting every bit of my heart and soul into achieving this goal that ultimately didn't come through. It took a tremendous amount of grit. But at the end of the day, I really was spinning my wheels towards the end. It wasn't going to happen. And so I took that same passion and grit and refocused it, not only to my military experience, but then ultimately to a career in corporate America, and just took everything I learned along the way in order to achieve as much as I could.
Yeah, and you obviously have all those disciplines, but you're also not afraid to take risks. Tell me about Coeur d'Alene.
So for a period of time, I had the honor of leading the marketing communications for Cessna Aircraft Company. And we were having a convention, a Cessna Jet Pilots Convention in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And a gentleman walked up to me and said, "Hey, Roxanne, you want to go fly?" And by the way, I was a student pilot at the time. I believe you're a pilot, so I can relate a bit. So I said, "Do I?" Of course I do. Yes. And let me just tell you, this gentleman was Charlie Precourt, and he was, a former NASA trainer of astronauts, right? And so I was thinking to myself, this man has flown in outer space. Like this man probably has more flight hours than I have living hours, right? And so I'm like, of course, I'm not going to pass this up. Now, it was a non-certified aircraft that we were flying sort of tandem on. He was in front and I was behind. My husband to this day tells me I was ridiculous for doing that. I'm like, you have very few opportunities in life to do cool things. So we flew in Coeur d'Alene, loops, barrel rolls. When we landed, he said, "Roxanne, two things. Number one, you joined the wrong service. You should not have went in the Army. You should have went in the Navy." And to which I said, "Boo hiss." He said, "You should have went in the Navy and become a pilot. And oh, by the way, number two, you are now call sign Giggles because you had such a great time. You were laughing the entire way. And usually it takes me about 5 seconds for people to yak once I get them up in the air. And you never did. And you loved every minute of it. So from now on, your call sign Giggles." So yeah,
that's awesome. I mean, when people become a pilot, they take you on like a discovery flight.
Yes.
And it's more or less, we're going to put you in a little airplane because you've never been in one before, just to see if you can handle it. I would say that you passed your discovery flight pretty well. And, flight training is great. I think everyone who wants to lead or train should go through at least some hours of flight training.
Completely.
Because everything else we do in life, it's like, okay, well, learn this, do that. And now for some people, the stakes are very high. But, if you don't, what's the negative outcome? Well, you have to readjust it or this. Flight training is great because, like, if you don't do this, you'll die. I mean, it's like the stakes are high. So pay attention. So that's great.
But if you think about everything that's associated with business at the same time, not to interrupt you, Dave, but so when the entire time you're flying, so when I was a student pilot, you're always watching. It's like, take your eyes off the dials, take your eyes off of the Garmin or whatever, keep your eyes on the horizon and just fly the darn plane, right? Yeah. But oh, by the way, as you're flying, you always have to be contingency planning. What if the engine stops? Where am I going? What is the clearing? What is, am I doing all of the right, kind of calls back to air traffic control, that sort of thing. There was an article even that talked about how some of the best CEOs were actually pilots, and the training that they were able to deploy in leading their different organizations, and how that had come from learning how to fly.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you've just really struck a chord with me on something so important. So definitely flying outside the plane, they call it, right? You
Yes.
don't look at your controls. You look outside and you make sure that you're managing everything that way. Now, what's interesting, though, is when you go for your instrument rating, it changes. And now that's all you do is fly inside the plane. But the example that you gave, like on just understanding leadership, it is exactly the same thing, but it becomes a checkerboard. It inverts itself. So what happens now? If you're going to be a great leader, you have to have these intuitions. You have to look outside. You have to pay attention, right? And just fly the plane. But you have to pay attention to the data, and you have to trust the data. Yes. So what happens when you're flying instrument, they say, do not rely on your feelings. Trust the data, because you might feel like, you have a certain attitude or a certain pitch, and you're wrong, because your mind plays tricks on you. And if you try to correct that when you're in the clouds and you don't trust the data, all of a sudden you're gonna go from a bad spot to a worse spot. And those two parallels matter. So let's talk about your leadership now and some of the things you've done, because your story really is a great story. You were getting your MBA. That inspired you through some of your classes to get into the food industry. What was that lit the fire for you?
Absolutely. I think impact overall, right? I mean, just to be as succinct as possible, everybody eats. Everybody drinks. I don't mean alcohol, right? Everybody eats and drinks. And because of that, everybody has to make a choice on what they're choosing to, eat and drink. And so to have the ability to influence what people do and the choices that they make, and to have a maximum impact across the most people, to me was, incredibly motivating. And Kraft, as a beginning for me at that point in time, was heralded as really a place where business people went to become leaders. And so to learn business, because marketing at Kraft, you were a general manager at that time. And so to learn the business, to have the impact, to be able to go into a grocery store and get immediate feedback. And what I mean by that is to watch people taking things off the shelf or not, right? Yeah. That was just a tremendous opportunity for me that was, incredibly motivating.
I think one of the things that the people who watch a program is knowing what the challenges are. What are the hard things? And you must have gone through a lot of these things where all of a sudden it hits the fan and you have to fix it. You're paying attention to probably several different things at one time, not necessarily through like unregulated ambition, but, common sense oriented desire to advance. You're working on your career while you're dealing with all sorts of challenges. What are some that stand out?
As long as you're pushing the envelope and as long as you are in a vibrant space, it's always going to hit the fan. And it's not a question of if, it's a matter of when. And it's hit the fan for me a number of times, right? And what I do to address it is typically the same. But here's an example. So Kool-Aid. I was working on Kool-Aid, the ready-to-drink business, and we were working through a consumer promotion, right, where kids would call in for a chance to win. And right before we went to press on the packaging, that was going to be, going through the manufacturing lines, like literally a week or so later, my consumer promotions person came to me and said, we've got a problem. We just, on a whim, tried out the number. It sent us to a porn line. And I'm like, I'm sorry, a what? A porn line. I'm like, okay, well, Dave, I don't have to tell you, you can't send children to a porn line, right?
The story that you averted that would have been told forever in business school. Absolutely. Was that one. And for every story that is told that went kind of disastrous, there is a story like this where you had to make a correction nobody ever knows about. But those are like the heroic moments in business that, you just go home and you have to share with your family, but nobody else is really going to know.
No. And you let out the biggest sigh of relief that nobody is going to know. And thank goodness for that. Right. So that was one. There's several others. But I would say just in general, I've seen people panic. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts that I received from West Point and from the Army, which is an institution that strips you down to build you back up, right? Is just constant stress. And so I don't panic. So you just got to stay calm, gather the facts, understand what's real. There's a thing also referred to as fog of war, which is, things are not always what they seem in the beginning. So you got to stay calm, evaluate what's happening. And then you have to make a decision and drive forward, right? Like not be paralyzed and not worry about, what are people going to think. You have to stick to your North Star, to your own integrity and do the right thing. And so I've used that in each of those situations. But yeah, the Kool-Aid porn line is the one that comes to mind the fastest.
I think about that too. I remember being a young executive and being around more seasoned people and recognizing that above anything else was the calm. And for you, I think going through West Point, it probably made you wise beyond your years compared to a lot of peers. But now that's one of the biggest things that I notice is when I'm around a young person who's aspiring and growing, the fear and the panic sets in so early. And it's just when they're around somebody that's calm and that's happening, it does calm them. Would you say, what advice would you have for younger men and women who are entering in the workplace on how to build that, how to grow that? I mean, like you said, West Point is about a lot of stressors, all sorts of stress, so that you're able to manage the circumstance. So if you haven't gone through that training, how do you learn that virtue?
Right. It is a fantastic question. And honestly, it's not been part of my lived experience, but here's what I would recommend. There are so many opportunities to pause in the moment. Not everybody will be down with this, Dave, but I also believe in meditation. Right. So getting into those different things to really kind of connect, to ground yourself, to understand, to be able to, just kind of breathe deep, exhale, and then approach the situation. It also entails a lot of internal coaching, right, of yourself as well. Here's one of the things that I find really unfortunate about today's environment. When I was new to corporate America or new leader in the Army, even, there wasn't the same level or hardly any level, if any, of social media surrounding me that I was, bombarded on the daily with how successful everybody is, to the point where I felt like I wasn't keeping up. And I think that's what a lot of people experience today. Oh my gosh, everybody around me is succeeding. And, they're becoming millionaires before the age 30. I'm so far behind. And so then it's the panic of, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? And I got to go. So comparison is the thief of joy. It really is. And so just understanding what is it that you want to achieve, being focused. If you believe in meditation, if you can push yourself to try it, it really helps to calm, to ground yourself before you have to make those decisions. But don't compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to yourself.
Oh, that's such good advice. For me too, if I don't stop and take a moment to say a prayer, I'm done. I have to tap something more powerful than me. The other thing too about that social media, it's a fascinating thing. One of the businesses that I was in, we trained a lot of leaders. And a lot of people succeeded and failed. But one of the things that I noticed about people who did fail is they didn't know how to discern good or bad advice. And you see all sorts of charlatans online right now. Like you talked about, oh, this person's 30 and they're a millionaire. The number of people that I've seen that are like, oh, how to make 7 figures at age 25, who they're living with their mom in their basement and they're making they're not working at all. They don't have any income, but they went and rented a Ferrari and took a picture of it, and they went to somebody else's house and had a glass of wine in their hand to make it look like something real. So they don't really have good advice. It falls short. They've never been on the battlefield. And I watched people just get like swooned up and excited about the imagery, not recognizing that it's shallow and not real.
Correct.
And you want to be careful because you don't want to just like take pot shots at that sort of thing. But you're like, go to a mentor like Roxanne, who's been through something. Okay. She's not posting those pictures, but she's actually accomplished something, and ask her how she's doing it. Speaking of that, enemies at the gate. Yes. Whenever I have a guest on and I just say enemies at the gate, oftentimes I only have to say that and they go, oh, I've got a story for you. But there's always something happening to try to prevent your personal growth. Somebody who you wouldn't expect kind of getting in that way, or a competitor or something. When I say to you enemies at the gate, what comes to your mind and how'd you overcome those things?
Hey there, Giant. Dave Duran here, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our brand new e-newsletter where you will get the best of the best tips and insights to unlock the giant in you, build an empire, and slay some dragons. Sign up below. Let's go slay some dragons.
Anytime you're successful, you're going to become a target. And I think learning that early in your career and not being jaded by it is an important thing as well. So there's a couple different directions I could go with this. If I just think, because there's been some pretty intense experiences that might be more of a Trojan horse, but there's also this idea of, just as you said, enemies at the gate. I am a competitor and I compete fiercely, but I compete with ethics and values, right? I was the chief marketing officer for Post cereals, Post consumer brands, and having a great time in terms of just growing market share. We were growing market share, being outspent 5-1 by the big boys, General Mills and Kellogg's being a previous employer of mine. And we were crushing it. I'm so proud of the team. We were focused, playing our own game, but they were coming after us. They were trying to block us out of everything that we could do, right? And you hear about this all the time. Coke and Pepsi, same thing. Like sometimes they'll ink contracts that make no sense for their business, but they're doing it just to keep the other one out, right? Yep. Waste of resources, in my opinion. But at the same time, I'm constantly under attack, constantly trying to woo your partners away, trying to get the contracts. And so you just realize that is going to happen. And so the focus is staying one step ahead. If you compete in the now, you're done. You need to compete in what's ahead, right? And so by the time your competitor is focused on what is happening in the moment, if that's where you get them to compete, you've won. Right? Because you're already on that next step and kind of moving forward there, right? So anybody who is in myopically and with blinders on looking at the moment, it is a danger sign, and I would encourage you to get your eyes out on the horizon, right? And go fly the plane.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to do because we're talking about competing against smart people.
No, for sure. Some of the best.
Some of the best, and you got ahead of them. So, can I ask then if they're spending that much more,
yes,
and you're just getting ahead of the curve? I mean, you're kind of like there before they arrive,
right?
Is there a how-to thing, or is that intuition? You just have it. You have this thing about you that can get ahead of that, or is there like a strategy you have for that?
So my grounding position has always been to know my audience, right? And so any business that I'm in, the customer that I'm seeking to serve, a fantastic former boss of mine, Sharon Fox, quoted it as being customer obsessed, right? And I believe in that. So, and I'd never actually put words to it before hearing her say that. So just being obsessed with what they want, what they're looking for, what they need, right? And so always staying focused on that does keep you one step ahead, because it's not just what they're buying today, but what they're disappointed that they don't have. And that what they don't have takes a little bit of time to build. And most people are competing in the what is there today, right? So from my standpoint, it's always strategically what comes next. Strategy is a choice. Where do I choose to be 3 years from now? And how am I going to get there? But you can't do it for yourself alone, and you can't do it for accolades. You have to be customer obsessed to know what they want, what they need, and what's going to lead you there. And you got to have a team that you believe in, that you trust, that you give that rope to just go kill it, right? And you give them trust, and you give them belief, and you give them what the military would refer to as commander's intent. Here's where we're going. Here's what we got to go tackle. Let's go get it done, right? And so if you can galvanize a team to see that vision, I think that'll win every time. What the competitors were doing at that particular moment was speaking to more of a popularized or almost activist siren song, right? Everybody wants fill in the blank, right? And you can fill in your latest malady, right? Everybody wants less sugar. Everybody wants to avoid X or Y or Z, right? And so wanting to be the banner of yes, and so here's our solutions to that. But when you watch what people were putting their dollar down, and when you talk to them about, well, what do you want? What are you looking for? It was none of that stuff, right? So if you're working for yourself to make yourself or your entity seem like the hero or the savior of whatever, at the expense of listening to who you ultimately serve, well, that's what was causing them to lose market share to me.
You just gave me 4 hours worth of questions that I wanted to ask you. I would say I see people all the time. They'd rather be right to their own demise than wrong to their own prosperity. And you
Correct.
see that in meetings, even when marketing data tells them they're wrong, they're still fighting for something that's just their idea. But you really put a great blend of two different things together. But I don't want to forget this question, so I'm gonna ask it just to have it hang out there and then come back.
Okay.
You're a powerful woman. You're in charge. You can make decisions. You lead those teams, and because of that, you can empower people. So you build simultaneously culture and strategy by empowering people. What do you say to that person who doesn't have that power, who doesn't have that authority, and yet has a really incredible insight, and they know what it is that they have can help, but they feel like they don't have the influence? So there's that power that you have to influence somebody because of your title, but then there's the power to influence a person in the more raw sense, which is just like, I've got to sell this idea. How do you coach these younger people to influence somebody that right way if they don't have the authority you have?
Yeah. Step up to the plate, right? Oftentimes, I've seen this more often than not. People think that they do not have influence or ability. People think, oh, I am just, right? I am just an analyst. Oh, I am just, an associate working on X, Y, or Z. It's like, yeah, you are an associate with a really damn good idea. Step up to the plate, right? Take a swing. What's the worst that can happen, right? Pitch the idea. Don't find yourself regretting what you could have or should have done later. It takes courage. And let me just be clear. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Yeah. Courage is moving forward despite your fear. Mm-hmm. And people need to realize that. They feel fearful, and so they step back. Oh, well, I'm just not the courage. Like, no, grab it. Go get it. Right? I mean, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, that's a fortitude. The virtues, people miss how powerful they are. I mean, the answer, pretty much every one of these things you're talking about come back to the virtues. I mean, you're talking about strategy, which is great decision-making. It's in essence, it's prudence. And now you come back to the whole idea of fortitude, that moving forward when things are difficult. I would say conviction too. When people just kind of like lamely put out an answer there or an idea, with a tiny little raise of the hand, as opposed to what you're saying, put yourself out there and
right,
take
exactly,
and say it like you mean it.
Yes,
yeah, that's
absolutely.
Fantastic. Speaking of, you made reference to this, the idea of the Trojan Horse.
Oh, yes.
These are the difficult times when you think you are aligned with a bunch of different people, but all of a sudden there's something that shocks you, like right inside. It's not an enemy at the gate anymore. There's somebody inside. Have you ever faced that?
Oh, yes. It was a very painful time in my career, Dave. It was. And I'm going to do the best I can to not say the company, right? Because
the names are withheld to protect the innocent.
Right, exactly, right? Because it's the story that matters, and it's the what, not the who at this point, right? That matters. I was doing really well, Dave. I was close to the top of my game. Fantastic team, crushing the objectives, beating competition. It was great. And I think that it made me a target. I know it made me a target. I said that before, right? When the strong people become targets, and clearly someone was trying to take me down. I've never told this story publicly before. But there was a person who to this day remains in that cowardly Trojan horse. I don't know who they were, but they began writing letters. They wrote a lot of anonymous letters disparaging me tremendously to my peers on the executive team, sending them to their homes, mind you, even. These letters were getting mailed to home addresses, to my peers, to the chairman of the board, to the CEO that I worked for. And it's interesting because the CEO in one of our staff meetings said, someone is trying to sow discord among the team. So if any of you receive some sort of a letter, bring it to me. And I remember thinking, well, that's odd. And I never saw anything else about it, right? And so then he pulls me in to his office one day and he said, Roxanne, do you remember when I told everybody that? I'm like, yep. And he looked at me and I said, oh, wow. Was it about me? And he said, yes. And he actually shared with me, which I thought was a wonderful move for a leader to make. He shared, some of the letters with me. And I looked at them and Dave, I wasn't bothered by what was being said. It was garbage. Sure. It was garbage, but I knew it was garbage immediately. And he did too. And I was supported by that. And that made me feel pretty good. I knew immediately. I'm like, I'm not bothered by what this says. There's not an ounce of truth in any of it. He said, I know that. I said, but what bothers me is what would lead somebody to do this? Like what culture, what person, and is there something that I have done to bring that out in someone, right? And so that was difficult because I didn't know where the arrows were coming from, but they kept coming, right? And when they went to my team that I lead, that was almost like, gosh, say whoever you want to these people who, work with me on a daily basis, but don't create doubt in the minds of the people that I'm leading. Why would you do that, right? But I still to this day don't know who it was. The thing that refocused me was the gentleman who was ultimately the chairman of the board, amazing human being, great business person, one of the best. He said to me, Roxanne, nobody takes down the weak ones. Nobody tries to take down the weak ones. You're doing awesome. Stay focused. Keep doing it. And oh, by the way, if you're really down about it, Google my name and you're going to find all kinds of garbage. So maybe that'll make you feel better, right? Yeah. So I felt incredibly supported. I knew I was supportive. I don't know who the coward was. I just knew that they were at the executive level and found it really
and jealous probably. I mean, it was probably somebody who was jealous. Those are horrible stories, but I really don't know of anyone who hasn't gone through something not necessarily exactly like that, but something similar. And I remember saying to my kids, who are all adults and out on their lives now, but when they were young, I said, listen, if you want to build something big, you're gonna make some enemies, and that's just a part of it. And you don't try to make enemies, you try to build bridges, but they're going to be there. Just look up the Pope or Dalai Lama or the president, and you're going to find there's just as many negative things as positive things out there, because they stand for something. You have to stand for something, and when you do, somebody's not going to like it. But let me ask you this, though. Well, first of all, you had great leaders around you. And this is another thing I found, too, because as a CEO, I've had people try to do that sort of thing to others within organizations that I've led, and I've just never been dumb enough to believe it. I look at that and I'm like, it's not real. So your leaders were also with that same level of understanding. But still, though, it's hard. It's just hard. What did you do? I mean, how did you get through it? I mean, it's not just as easy as going, I'm not bothered, I'll drive home now and have a glass of wine. I mean, there's something more to it.
Which is what's funny, right? Because that's what my leaders were telling me. Oh, don't even worry about this. Like, shove it on. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. Dave, I'm as human as anybody else, right? Yes. And so, in quiet moments or when I'm by myself, I was crushed, right? Yeah. Like it crushed me. But the way that I approached it was to, particularly when it started happening, when the letter started going to my team, was to just meet it head on, right? So, with the help and the blessing of the CEO at the time, brought them in a room, acknowledged that many of them had received letters. Some of them had not, and they were hearing this for the first time, and their response was, WTF. But so some of you have been receiving letters, don't know who they're coming from or why they're being sent, but I can tell you they are not true. You've worked for me long enough, but if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them, right? Mm-hmm. If you have any uncertainties because of it, I'm here. Like, ask me questions. So, they would ask some questions there in the moment, right? Mostly, again, of the WTF variety and who would do such a thing. And, but then some of them would ask me questions one-on-one, but I just had to create a safe space for them to come forward. One gentleman who had received on my team, who had received a letter at home, brought it forward, didn't previously have visibility to that particular letter. He's like, I never believed it, but I also couldn't understand who would have sent me this, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just don't get it. I'm behind you, but here was another one that happened, right? And so it just, I had to have built trust along the way with that team, because if I didn't have it, it could have freaked all of them out. So mm-hmm. the person who retained the letter because they couldn't believe that he had received it, based on what was the contents of the letter could have become very, very closed off and untrusting of myself. So I just had to create a safe space for them to be able to approach me with whatever and ask any question that they wanted to. That's I'm an open book when it comes to my leadership style. And for me, facing it head on, as uncomfortable as it is how I approach it.
Giants, we need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants like you. Head over to Apple Podcasts and give this podcast a 5-star rating so we can build an army of giants and go slay dragons together.
Yeah, and strength attracts. I mean, people are very attracted to strength. And if they're saying, because what they're saying is, if this were happening to me, I don't know how I could take it. And they're watching you handle it that way. And they're just, all of a sudden, it's the type of thing where, counter to a negative impact, it has a stronger impact. Because really, at the end of the day, the question they all ask is, what kind of person would do this? They don't have to ask it. They know what kind of person would do it. A complete low-life coward loser. That's exactly who would do it. And so they kind of rally around because of that. So you've distinguished yourself in many different ways. When you were young, you were able to distinguish yourself as a leader, but also with athletic prowess, which caught attention. Now you're at, West Point. And when you're there, it's, there's a lot of athletes. So you had to take it to the next level. But really, you have to establish your place intellectually and mentally and strategically. At some point, we can't just physically make our way, right? Well, how did you distinguish I suppose that people say now, how did you create your brand, right? That's what they say. But how did you distinguish yourself? And then how does that extend into your philosophy about distinguishing products or divisions and what you do?
Yeah, it has to be authentic, Dave. So the way that I establish myself is through authenticity. And I think that's a word that's probably thrown around, too much, or maybe people don't quite understand it. But I am an empathetic leader. And by the way, empathetic, but accountability to the nines, right?
So I did a post on LinkedIn and I said, what did I say? I said, empathy. There's something about empathy giving you an insight into your ability to lead. And if you're an empathetic leader, you are taking in consideration the entire circumstance and the person in order to make decisions. Okay, easy. I couldn't believe that I get this guy who responds back, and he first of all, he didn't respond to me. He did what cowards do. He reposted it to his audience and then says, this guy lives in a fantasy world. Empathy has no place in the business world. And by the way, he's a best-selling Fortune 500 executive consultant. He says, if you have to fire somebody or close a division, that's not going to work. And then one of his senior executives of a worldwide global company, responds also saying, yes, this guy doesn't live in the real world. You can't operate that way. So I had so much fun with that one. I responded back and I said,
I'm going to have to go look that up.
They took it down. They I don't mind saying this. They took it down because I just absolutely smacked them in the next year. I don't know how to say that. I normally don't do that. I normally don't engage, but I have a book coming out next year, 70,000 words, and I had to write that day. And I was groggy and not feeling like writing. And I thought, if I engage this, I'm going to fire off so many different things in my brain to get me ready. And I just did it just to prepare myself to write that day. But I said, here, what I want you to do is this. I want you to go to your HR department, or if you ever run an interview, and I want you to print off what I just said, and then print off what you said, put it on the wall, and say, which one of these two companies do you want to work for? And
no doubt.
That's going to be a pretty easy thing. So I'm sorry to go off on a probably seemingly self-indulgent tangent there, but talk more about this idea of empathy and branding yourself and authenticity.
Yes. So what those people clearly missed is that empathy doesn't mean, warm and fuzzy and, everybody gets a pony and do whatever you want to do. It means treating people like the human beings that they are. Look, if you're a leader, your responsibility is to bring out the best in people. And how do you bring out the best in people if you cannot relate to them, right? If you don't understand where they're coming from, why they do what they do, if you can't put yourself in their shoes, how are you ever going to bring out the best in them, right? You're going to have some cookie cutter approach. It's going to be do as I say, not as I do, right? And that's not a recipe. Well, let me just be clear. That's not a place I want to be, right? Yes. And so being empathetic doesn't mean you can't be highly accountable at the same time, right? It doesn't mean that you never have to do a riff. It doesn't mean that you never have to let somebody go who simply isn't working out. But what it says is that you will take their job, but you will never take their dignity. Right. And so you will help them, be what they need to be. And so I don't believe in this, you have to become some automaton without a soul because you're leading an organization. And again, that's not an organization I would want to be part of if that was at the top.
And the expression on your face too, as I'm telling you this, okay, it was what my expression was. And by the way, I've consulted with, Fortune 10 companies, right? Mm-hmm. But the companies that I build are usually a few hundred million or 10 million or less with 50 employees to maybe 4,000 or 5,000, right? So it's in that space where I have found myself as an entrepreneur. I was like, and I've spent enough time in the walls of Fortune 500 organizations consulting to know that these people are by far outnumbered by the best people, but they don't even realize how they become the meme for what people hate about corporate America.
Yes.
And they couldn't see it. So this is, I think, one of those things tell me about pride and humility and how these things factor into your success.
So they go hand in hand, and they are also governors on each other and good checks and balances. If one becomes, markedly ahead of the other, it's a bad thing, right? If you become prideful with no humility, we've all seen those people, and none of us want to work for them, right? We have stories to the hilt of all the bad experiences. If your humility is off the charts with low pride, well, your self-esteem, like, you're probably not putting yourself out there. You're probably not taking a lot of risks. You're probably thinking you're not good enough. You're not, right. And so for me, both are present and strong drivers for me, but they also keep each other in check. I am not the smartest person in the room. I pray to God that I never am. Right. I want really, really smart people all around me, because that makes the organization better, and that increases the odds of success. The day I walk into a room and I'm like, these are all a bunch of chuckleheads and none of them know anything, right? Then I need to move on, because then it's not going to be a good situation. So the humility and the hunger to learn and to understand that I don't know it all is critically important. But make no mistake, I am very proud of what I am able to achieve, right? I am very proud and, not hesitant to tell you the things that I've been able to accomplish. And I've been able to accomplish them not only by myself alone, but by an amazing team that I'm surrounded by, right?
Yeah.
And so they have to be equal.
They do. It's like humility is like precision truth about ourselves, right? So we know when we have humility that we say, hey, it's time for me to step up, just like you said before, and I can feel confident in this. And you know what? I did a good work, and therefore I should feel good about that good work, because if you don't, and you don't recognize it, you won't duplicate it, which is a very problematic thing. In talking to you, one of the things that does come out a lot, and this is what I call my organization leading giants. You said you don't want to walk into a room with a bunch of chuckleheads thinking that.
Right.
I always laugh at a person who does that, because I'm like, okay, one of the biggest responsibilities of any leader is to recruit and assemble their team. And if they're taking something over where they didn't do the recruiting, it's to replace that team so that you don't have chuckleheads in the room and you've got a bunch of brilliant people. And they just kind of forget that. They look and they think, these people are not a threat to me, but they are a reflection of me.
Right.
So when you're identifying talent and you want to elevate somebody to a great position, what are those first triggers that say to you, Roxanne, hey, this is a person I want them next to me? Yeah. What makes you make that decision?
Oh, they have to have a point of view. So when I ask a question, there can be no equivocation, right? What do you think about this? Right? How do you feel? Why did you do that? What is that? So as soon as people try to, kind of water something down or make it politically correct, or they're not really sure what I'm asking, right? I also want people who will argue with me, right? Like, I'm not looking for people who are, just adversarial to the hilt, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the point. The point is, will they fight with me? Right? In a respectful, like, will they argue with me? Will we debate? Will I disagree with them? Right? And I want those things. And so if I'm interviewing somebody for the first time, or if I'm talking to a new group that I go into and it's all like, well, whatever you would like, or what do you think that we should do? Oh, that's, to me, that's that's a really bad sign. Right? And so if you have a point of view, right, and you're not shy to express it, right, and you will argue with me, right? So if I put something out there that you don't agree with, you will let me know about it, right? And you will explain your position and what underlies your position and why you feel the way you feel. That's a beautiful thing. So that's what I want in the people that are around me, right? Smarts, state their point of view, and are willing to argue with me.
See, and that's tremendous too, because what people don't realize when they try to be politically correct and to just be vanilla and whatever you think, right, they don't realize that those things would make them a pathetic leader.
Yes.
And you're elevating people, you're leading giants so they can become giants. So you look at what those behaviors are. So, one of the things about working out is if you want to gain 10 pounds of muscle, you want to go from 200 to 210 pounds, you have to start eating like you're 210 pounds.
Right.
Because if you do all the physical things, but you're not eating like that,
right,
you can't ever get to that level.
No.
In leadership, it's the same way. If you don't start acting like the leader now,
right,
you're not that you're trying to usurp authority or take, make decisions that are not underneath your banner. But if you don't come with that point of view, people
right,
don't get that. And it's attractive, isn't it?
It really is. And you just said something really important that I just want to, everything you say is important. That sounded bad, but
no, clearly not, by the way.
Leadership is not a title, right? So when you say, well, you serve authority, you're a leader. You might be an individual contributor and you can still be a leader.
Well, that's true. I mean, the difference between influence and authority are two different things. I mean, you may not have the authority to do something, but you can influence it.
Correct.
And the difference between having a position and a person of influence is also radically different. And I think that a lot of people rely too much on their authority. And they say, yes, well, it can be this way because I can just make the decision. Okay, great. But now you know what you have? You have a compliant organization. I always tell people when you're raising kids, if you raise compliant kids and you track every moment and movement that they have, so you know everything. Man, when I was a kid, it was like, hey, come home before the sun's down. And it was exactly. Like, okay, great. And if I wanted to play a game in the backyard, I had to recruit the kids to get it done. And if they beat up on me and I lost the game, I mean, I didn't have like an audience back at home with my parents to get a bunch of cookies and trophies and empathy. It was like, well, if you want to win, you got to go play harder.
Right.
But now what happens is, you've got this situation where people have a difficult time understanding authority. And so they were raised in a compliant way, meaning that they didn't have a chance to make mistakes. But I see these guys that are so micromanaged in life that by the time they graduate from college and nobody's looking at everything they do, they're afraid.
Right. Or they don't know what to do.
And they don't know what to do. They don't want to make a decision because they've never made a mistake. They never gotten a fight on the playground. I don't know how that sounds to you at all. I'm not a violent man. I mean, I'm a second degree black belt, but I believe in peace. And come on, let's just take a chance and take risks. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I say amen. I see the same thing. And so here's what I would say. I mean, these people that you're referring to, very sheltered, that you could see almost sort of helicopter parents, kind of always guiding them exactly what to do, right? Always telling them, now do this, now do that, right? Very obediently and in great compliance, doing what they're supposed to do. Then they get out on their own and they don't know what to do. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know where to turn. They don't know how to take a risk on something. And what are they meeting in some cases in the corporate world today? They're meeting people who are micromanagers, not in all cases, but when they then get exposed to that and their managers, because they think that they're smarter, are saying, do this or do that, or here's exactly how you should do it, or they're not having enough courage themselves to give their team members rope to do it the way that they think is the right way, or giving them enough space to skin their knees. That's what I say. Look, I will let you skin your knees. I'm not going to let you fail. There's there's a difference there, right? As leaders, we are robbing people of their ability to stumble, because in those moments of stumbling, that's where people learn, right? That's where people, kind of think about, the backyard, game of, I don't know, stickball that you might have been playing, right?
Yeah.
If one of your buddies, if Jimmy from the neighborhood has the same move every single time, right, and it results in pain and loss every single time, what are you going to do? You're going to adjust, right?
Yeah.
And then you're going to kick the snot out of little Jimmy the next time you guys play stickball in the backyard, and all is good. But you've got to give people the opportunity to do that, to experience that pain, for lack of a better word, the discomfort. Mm-hmm. Right? So that they can learn and adjust. And maybe what they did was not the way that you would have done it, but maybe it's just as effective. Right. And so there could be learning on both sides. So just to kind of, yes, people are taking risks, and then they're going into an organization that doesn't give them the ability to take those risks.
Exactly. And those painful points are great learning moments. And this is where you go from with your organizations that you're building are willful. That's what I would say. You can have a compliant organization. That's fine. But they're just following the rules because they don't want to get caught, because they're afraid they won't make a decision. But a willful environment is totally different. Why did you do that? Because I wanted to. Why? Because I love what we're doing here. I love my team.
Right.
Why did you do that? Because I had to. Very different things.
Yes.
So do you want to hear about my greatest track moment?
Of course I do. Absolutely.
This is going to be so impressive to you. Talk about learning. So I missed my heat. So first of all, I was not fast like you. And I had a complex when I ran track, because I could run like a 54 400. Okay. So that's fast enough to be on the team, but there were like 7 or 8 guys on my team that were running sub 50. So they were fast people.
Nice. Yeah.
I was at an indoor meet, and I had to run the quarter mile, and I had missed my heat. I don't know why I missed my heat, but I was pushed into the fastest heat, and there were 3 Olympic hopeful guys in that heat.
Oh, so, my goodness.
On an indoor track, it's 2.5 laps.
Yeah.
And if you're on the outside stagger, you're like 1/3 of the way around the track practically. It should, if all things are equal, take, 2 of those 2.5 laps before people are jockeying for who's going to win. No. I have the outside stagger. And before the first lap is over, these guys pass me. Oh. And they were so far done with that race that, I mean, if you think about an 8-second difference in an indoor meet like that, everybody started walking on the track like the race was over while I was still running. And I hear this big booming voice go, "Oh my, look at that white boy. Look at that white boy. He's still going." And I wanted to run off the track, but you realize, hey, there are some things that I'm good at, some things I'm okay at, and some things that I'm not very good at. And how does this help me form who I am? Right. Yeah. And you just kind of learn from those experiences, and being humbled like that works. So I guess one of the last questions that I have for you is, you said something really cool. You when you sent me an email and we talked about you being on the show, you said an aspiring giant. And what is so funny about that is that you are a giant. And you have this attitude of aspiring, even though you already are. So you've got the humility to just not self-proclaim yourself something, even though others would. But also what that said is that I am never done growing. Talk about that. What do you do to grow every single day? Where are the disciplines that you have that you study, or just talk about personal growth for you?
Yes. I believe very strongly that you can always get better. And that you should always strive to be better, right? And so I'm not done yet. There's so many things that I don't even know I want to do yet that I want to do that I will go after. But in terms of keeping kind of feeding myself to continue to develop, I do a lot of reading. I've heard people say before, "Oh, I don't have the time to read." You kind of need to make time. So I read, a lot of, business news. I read a lot of books, growth mindset. Read one recently, The Performance Paradox. I hear a really cool guy who's leading giants is coming out with a book soon, so I'm sure I'll be reading that.
It will be aptly titled Leading Giants, coming from Ben Bella next January.
Well, then I know what to look for. But constantly reading at where have others gone before? What were the stumbling blocks? How did they get beyond them? There's an interesting book, $1 Billion Mistakes. I asked somebody if they'd read that. They're like, oh, I would never read that. I'm like, why would you never read that? Why would I want to make a mistake? I'm like, you want to read it so that you don't? And so, I was just talking about, assumptions people make in M&A and, why that caused any particular deal to go tremendously south quickly. And, the hubris that sometimes goes into decision making. So just kind of keeping a really wide net, a wide aperture on all the things that I would read and be exposed to. Putting myself out there to go to different events to learn from them. I'm going to go to an AI conference next week, as a matter of fact, to like, okay, a lot of people say they know AI. I'm smart enough to know that I don't know AI, right? Or generative AI, and trying to get into that a little bit more. So constantly putting yourself out there. You can learn from your team. And if you can't learn from your team, you need a new team, right? So constantly doing those things, staying connected to others, hearing their story when people reach out and they need help, helping them, because you're going to get something out of that at the same time. I'm kind of waxing on now, Dave, but that's what, for me, it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of understanding, a lot of listening to podcasts, love podcasts, to really get a new perspective on things. Those are some of the individual things that I do.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And yeah. How about that too? Taking care of yourself. Yeah. These things matter in such a big way. And I would say this, that on this particular podcast, you have given a tremendous opportunity for people to learn, because what you've shared with us is really terrific. I mean, you have done something, I think, ultimately at the end of the day, people have to realize is necessary. You have formed your whole person, and you can't just like pick and choose. You have to become that authentic person, as you talked about, in order to have the accomplishments that you have made. So I want to thank you very much for everything that you've done here, and for the inspiration you're providing all sorts of people in your workplace, and extended beyond that too, because there's just no doubt about it. You can't do the things that you're doing without somebody else right now telling a story. They're saying, I had this great boss, or this great mentor, or this great, captain of the track team. And here's what she said. And they're talking about you behind your back in a positive way. So thanks for everything you've done here, Roxanne. And we look forward to, hearing the comments of the great things people have to say about you.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking a risk on someone who did a C.S. Lewis quote to your posting.
I saw your resume and I saw your quote. There was no risk involved, and it went as well as we thought it was going to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for watching Durand on Demand. We've got some incredible guests coming up next week as well, too. So if you want, please share this, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're sharing with your friends. Make sure that you're passing this on to everybody you can. There's always somebody that can learn from somebody like Roxanne and the rest of our guests, because they don't have the answers. They want those answers, and this is a great way for them to get those. Durand on Demand will be back next week. Thanks so much. Hey there, Giant. Thanks for watching Durand on Demand. I need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants. You know it, and I know it. We've been around a lot of people struggling, figuring out how to make things go. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this with as many people as you can. We're going to build this audience, and we're going to help people slay dragons together.